Hare Krishna. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us either via this live Zoom session or those of you who will hear the recording. It's been quite a journey going through the first four chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know about you guys, but for me, after going through the chapter on Monday morning, Singapore time, Asia time, I spent almost the whole week thinking about the chapter, which really helps uh, crystallize things for me in my life. So, very grateful for this opportunity. Today, we'll go through the fifth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. But before we do, fifth chapter is for me one of my favorite chapters because I originally got interested in spirituality, trying to find some peace and quiet. So for those of you who know me, I'm very academically minded, technically, technologically minded, and spent quite a bit of years in school doing PhD and then postdoc and so on. Somewhere during this process, uh, peace of mind gets affected because you're told by society that if you do well in high school, you will get into a nice college, and then you can find a nice job. And the formula, the sort of the rat race. So Bhagavad Gita was my way of getting out of it, and the fifth chapter especially has been extremely helpful and important in my life. So it's my pleasure to share that with all of you. But as always, let's begin with a mantra meditation session. So wherever you are in the world, please join us. Please close your eyes with both of your feet firmly on the ground and seated in a comfortable posture. Take a deep breath in, inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Come back to your normal breathing. We take a breath every 3 or 4 seconds. That is more than 20,000 breaths a day. But today, for example, it's 8 p.m. Eastern Time. All day, how many breaths have we taken that we are consciously aware of? So being mindful of what we do is extremely important to make progress spiritually, especially when we perform mantra meditation. So today, with full focus, being fully mindful, we will chant on the Maha Mantra. These transcendental sounds, Hare Krishna and Rama, have the potency to cleanse our baggage. And that's only possible when we chant them mindfully. So please join me. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, 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 Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, 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 Krishna 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 Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram, 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 Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Please continue to stay focused with your eyes closed. Take a deep breath in, inhale, and exhale. Come back to your normal breathing. We will take 30 seconds of silence. Softly open your eyes. Welcome. There is many of us today who cannot attend the live session. Some of you are at Geetanagari for the Memorial Day retreat with Romapada Swami, and some of you are busy because it's Memorial Day with family stuff. So especially my thanks to the few of you who can attend live, but also to those who receive this recording later on. So the fifth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is very, very special. But the author of the version of the Bhagavad Gita that we read, Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada, the modern day sage who distributed this knowledge quite freely around the world. The edition of the Bhagavad Gita, which is most widely read. As we saw in the introduction, there are more than 1,500 editions of commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, and the most popular, the most widely read, the most authentic according to scholars is the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So according to Srila Prabhupada, the author, it's very important not to just read the Bhagavad Gita verse by verse, but also to understand the flow of the Bhagavad Gita. So we'll attempt to do that before we get into the fifth chapter. The very first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita begins with surveying of the battlefield of Kurukshetra. On the one side, there are the Pandavas, including Arjuna, the five brothers to whom injustice has been done. Krishna is the chariot driver of Arjuna. Bhagavad Gita is primarily a discussion between Krishna and Arjuna, the infinite supreme and the infinitesimal living entity. And Arjuna is placed in the middle of the battlefield per his own request, and when he sees on the other side his beloved grandfather Bhishma, when he sees his beloved teacher Drona, he becomes beset with grief and is questioning why he has to fight in this battle, why he has to lead the army in the killing of so many soldiers, so many of his near and dear ones, out of affection for these personalities, out of mundane compassion. He begins to think like that. And hence he has this doubt. Should he do his duty and fight as a warrior? Warriors in Sanskrit are known as Kshatriyas. Shat means hurt. Triya means to overcome. those who help overcome hurt, those who protect the innocent. That is the word for warriors in Sanskrit. And Arjuna, as a warrior, as a Kshatriya, he has to protect justice, protect the innocent. But at the same time, he doesn't want to engage in the ghastly warfare, in the ghastly act of killing his near and dear ones, what to speak of so many other living entities. So he has this doubt, and he sets aside his bow and arrow, and being fully depressed, he sits on his rath, his chariot. And we learn from Srila Prabhupada that um, this should be us also. The Bhagavad Gita might be spoken on a battlefield 5,000 years ago, but the battle is going on within for all of us. And Krishna, in fact, emphasizes that Arjuna fight the inner battle. He cares lesser about the external battle with the Kauravas. He cares more about the inner battle that Arjuna is fighting. And in order to receive the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, just like Arjuna set aside his bow and arrow, we set aside our ego, we set aside our preconceived notions, and with an open mind and open heart, we receive the instructions of Krishna. So that was the first chapter, the doubt of Arjuna. Arjuna Vishada Yoga in Sanskrit. Then, in return to the surrender of Arjuna unto Krishna as his guru, Krishna begins to speak transcendental wisdom, and he begins with what the very first teaching of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is identity. He begins by speaking that we are not this body. He says, neither you nor I nor any of the kings and warriors assembled here was there a time when they did not exist, that there was never a time there will not exist. So he establishes the eternity of us. Even according to modern science, every 7 to 8 years, all the cells that are present in my body that are alive today, that will get in the next 7 to 8 years, that will die and new cells will replace them. The body is, after all, just a collection of cells. So by that definition, in 7 to 8 years, I have a new body. But however, there's something that remains constant. That something is eternal. And Krishna further establishes that that something is not material. It cannot be cut by a sword, burned by fire, wetted by water, so on and so on. And having established that, he also summarizes the different paths of yoga. He summarizes Buddhi Yoga, or yoga of intelligence, where one renounces from this world and acts out of intelligence. We saw this in detail. Yamuna Prabhu so beautifully took us through the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And finally, towards the end of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks, what is the symptoms of a person who intelligence is fixed in that way in Buddhi Yoga? That person in Sanskrit is called Sthita Prajna. Beautiful word. And we saw Krishna describe in 13-14 verses at the end of the second chapter such a person, including how he withdraws his senses from the sense objects of this world. The analogy is given of a tortoise or a turtle who withdraws his body, limbs of his body, including his head, into the shell so that he cannot be eaten even by the tiger. This world can eat us alive if we widely engage our senses with the sense objects of this world. There is so much sense objects in this world, so much distraction. If we engage constantly in those distractions, then the world will eat us alive. Then, so the third chapter begins. We saw how the third chapter began with Arjuna questioning, because Krishna in the second chapter had talked about both karma yoga, acting in detachment, performing one's duty in detachment, and also he had talked about Buddhi Yoga, where one renounces from the world completely and just focuses on going inside. So Arjuna has this question, which is better. Arjuna, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, asks on our behalf very, very beautiful and very, very important questions. So then the topic of duty is discussed or dharma is discussed in this wonderful third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And as part of that discussion, uh, towards the middle of the third chapter, Arjuna says, "Krishna, I don't have material desire. Why are you making me fight in this ghastly warfare?" And Krishna says to that, "Fight because it's your duty to set an example." Arjuna is a very enigmatic leader, even though the previous 12 years plus 13 years before the battle, they were away from the kingdom. They were sent to the forest, um, and they were not in regular touch with the citizens and so on. They were still so popular because of the charisma and the wonderful qualities of the Pandavas, including Arjuna. And even though they were so long away from the kingdom, they still managed to assemble an army of millions of soldiers. By some estimates, 8 million soldiers were assembled on the side of the Pandavas. And hence, obviously, people follow Arjuna. So Krishna is saying, and this is a great leadership lesson for all of us also. Even if millions of people don't follow us, there is always a few people who follow us. So um, we are in a position of responsibility as leaders in our families, in our offices, among our friends group, and so on. So lead by example. This is the first lesson of leadership, is act in a way that others can follow. So Krishna says to Arjuna, do your duty to set a good example. And then Arjuna asks towards the end of the third chapter, you have very clearly stated the duty. Many persons in this world know what their duty is, and they are righteously minded, but sometimes they still are not able to do their duty. Why? And Krishna says the enemy of a person who wants to do his duty is lust. Kama yesha, krodha yesha. Very important verse in the third chapter. And Krishna then goes on to describe the location of this enemy, lust, at the level of the senses. The lust is present at the level of the mind and at the level of the intellect. And we saw how it is the weakest. This enemy is the weakest at the level of the senses. So Krishna advises Arjuna, first control your senses, and then you can control your mind, and then you can control your intellect. You can bring your intellect in line. So then we see Arjuna has this question: uh, how to control the senses, mind, and intellect, how to fight the enemy of lust. And Krishna says, by transcendental knowledge. And last week we saw Yamuna Prabhu beautifully describe how this transcendental knowledge is received from the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It's received from a guru, Tadviddi Pranipatena Pariprashnena Seveya Upadeshyanti Te Jnanam Jnanina Tattvadarshanaha. Krishna says to Arjuna, even though he's personally present in front of Arjuna, he's saying, "Oh Arjuna, you should find a guru, one who knows and has walked the path, and he can teach you." So that was a predominant theme of the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And you all asked really wonderful questions around the Guru that we discussed with Yamuna Prabhu last week. Now Krishna has talked about identity, who we are. He has talked about duty, what should we do, what is our duty, and he's talked about transcendental knowledge, which helps us overcome lust. So with this background, he will talk about peace in this fifth chapter. And in the next chapter, you will see, which is nicely flowing from the fifth chapter, he'll talk about meditation or dhyana yoga. So in the fourth chapter, like I said, the predominant theme was disciplic succession, how you receive knowledge from a guru. And Krishna also gave transcendental knowledge about himself. Transcendental knowledge means knowledge of ourselves, who we are, knowledge of who God is, who Krishna is, and the relationship between the infinitesimal us and the infinite supreme. And also what this world is. The last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita predominantly deals with what this world is and what our relationship with this world is, what Krishna's relationship with this world is. We also saw in the fourth chapter that there are many paths of yoga, and they are like the rungs of a ladder, and all these paths to different levels of realization lead up to God. And Yamuna Prabhu beautifully described karma, vikarma, and akarma. Karma action uh, within the courts of civility, within the courts of scripture, even with material desire, is called karma. Action on the basis of material desire, which violates the codes of civility and scripture, that is called vikarma. That leads to bad reaction. Karma leads to good reaction. Akarma means activity that is performed out of duty, out of love only, not with material desire. This is called niskama karma yoga. Beyond performing activities in yoga beyond material desire. When it's performed in that way out of duty, or even better out of love, it has no reactions. Even if the act is killing your warriors in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, killing is widely recognized as a heinous act, but when that is done out of duty, it doesn't have a reaction. So that is karma, vikarma, and akarma. And further, we saw Yamuna Prabhu describe the glories of knowledge. 4 examples were given of a boat, a sword, a fruit, etc., to glorify knowledge. It's a boat because it carries us across this terrible ocean of material existence. It's a sword because it cuts our ignorance. It's fire because it burns our baggage, and so on. Beautiful examples. At the very end of that chapter, we saw this wonderful 2 verses, 41st and 42nd verse. This 41st verse, Yoga Sanyasta Karmanam Jnana Sanchina Samshayam Atmavantam na Karmani Nibandhanti Nibadnanti Dhananjaya. See, I don't know the Devanagari script or Sanskrit myself, but at this point I've read the Bhagavad Gita at least a couple of dozen of times, and the Sanskrit really sticks with you. So that's why I describe that. Even if many of you don't know the language, it's nice to hear it. Yoga Sanyasta Karmanam. So Krishna Sanyasta means to give up. Krishna is saying in yoga, give up karmana. And this is where the confusion begins for Arjuna, because karma has multiple meanings. As you might already know, karma means action. Karma also means duty, and karma also means reaction. Karma phala, as it is called. In this particular case, yoga sanyasta karmanam, Krishna is saying by yoga, sanyasta, give up the results of action. Karma phala, that's what he's saying. But Arjuna understands this to mean by yoga, give up action itself, not the results of action. And follow this 41st verse up, like Yamuna Prabhu presented. In the 42nd, very last verse of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna concludes the wonderful 4th chapter by saying, Arjuna, with this transcendental knowledge, stand up and fight. And so now Arjuna is a little confused with that instruction, because according to his understanding, He feels in the 41st verse, Krishna is saying, give up action. And in the 42nd verse, he's saying, stand up and fight. So what is it? Should I give up action, or should I stand up and fight? That is the very first verse of the 5th chapter. Sannyasam karmanam Krishna punaryogam cha samshasi yashreya tanme bruhi sunishchitam. So, should I give up action, Krishna, or should I perform my duty? Krishna, and he uses a very seminal word here. Shreya yetayor ekam. Shreya means just tell me one thing. Shreya means the ultimate good. There is prayas and there is shreyas. There is the immediate good and there is the ultimate good. Sometimes we perform activities just for the immediate enjoyment, for example. Things that give us ephemeral happiness. For example, sometimes we might have, say, an exam tomorrow, but there is some sporting event that we have been looking forward to on this Sunday, and we sit and watch that event for immediate enjoyment. But one that is prayers for immediate enjoyment. Shreyas refers to for ultimate enjoyment, when one performs activities keeping the long-term benefits in mind. For example, on that day, even though there is the sporting event, if a child sits down disciplined and studies for the exam rather than watch that sporting event, that is Shreyas. And Arjuna uses this word thrice already in the Bhagavad Gita in the beginning of the 2nd chapter. Yashreyasya nishitam bruhi tanme, he says in the 7th verse. I surrender unto you, O Arjuna, O Krishna. Please tell me what is the ultimate good for me, Shreya. And he uses it also in the beginning of the 3rd chapter when he asks, should I renounce or should I perform my duty? He wants to know, Shreya, what is the ultimate good for him, the 2nd verse of the 3rd chapter. And he categorically states here, oh Krishna, please tell me definitively what I should do. This is what I mentioned earlier. Shreya is, it's important to understand the message of the Bhagavad Gita as it flows, like I said in the beginning. But it's also important to learn how to read the Bhagavad Gita. And that's one of the goals of this summary series, is perhaps to give you tools to read the Bhagavad Gita better. So a truly intelligent person thinks of Shreya, not prayer. This is for us also, when we perform any activity, it's good to question what is the ultimate good for us. And ultimately, everybody wants happiness. There is no doubt about that. But do we want sustained long-term happiness or ephemeral happiness? Very important question to ask ourselves. And to this, Krishna gives a wonderful answer. He says, both are good for liberation. Both performing your duty and renouncing is good for liberation. Because remember, in this first verse, Arjuna is saying, should I give up action or should I perform my duty? How does work lead to liberation? And also, Krishna states that karma yoga, performing your duty rather than giving it up, is better specifically for you. For us, it's better because we have material desire. So, and this is a theme in the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Again and again, Krishna comes back to that question, should I fight? Should I give up my right to the kingdom and become non-violent and renounce to and go and live in the forest? So here again, once Krishna says this, Arjuna says, how does work lead to liberation? And here Krishna emphasizes to Arjuna that I'm not talking about giving up your action, I'm talking about giving up the results of your action. So if you don't hate or desire the results of your activities, then work leads to liberation. But is again that same question comes up with Arjuna. Arjuna wants to know, but isn't karma sannyas, which is renouncing action, better? And here, this is a seminal theme of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, instead of taking sannyas of karma, instead of giving up action, take sannyas in karma. Perform actions without expecting the results. Give up the results of your work, understanding that anyway nothing belongs to you. Then the work also doesn't belong to me. Arjuna is very, very smart. He is a very elevated personality, and he is specifically selected by Krishna and put in this situation so that he can speak the Bhagavad Gita for our benefit. And Arjuna asked the best questions as the most qualified person would in this situation. So when Krishna talks about giving up the results of your work, and that nothing belongs unto you, Arjuna asks, then the work also doesn't belong to me? And Krishna explains, if you want to be happy, just merely giving up action or detachment from matter or karma sannyas doesn't give you happiness. That is, so everyday life, if one is pursuing material things, is compared to banging our head against the wall continuously. And when we do the negative of stopping that everyday activity, it gives us some relief in that we are no longer banging our head against the wall, but we also don't experience any happiness. So Krishna further explains that by performing your duty, going about your life, not being attached to matter but being attached to the spirit, performing activities without attachment to the result, but rather doing them out of duty, doing them out of love, can quickly unite you with the Supreme and is the source of all happiness. So, while just detachment from matter or karma sannyas doesn't make you happy, performing activities not being attached to matter can make you happy. Very, very profound understanding of the Bhagavad Gita. Then Arjuna goes on to ask, but I don't understand why one should work then. And Krishna says again an important point for the purification of heart of all the selfishness it has. But because when we perform work just out of duty and not out of selfish desire, slowly the selfish desire goes away. It is a process of cleansing of our heart of all the different material desires that we have. Any material desire we have is selfish because we are not the proprietor of anything. Nothing really belongs unto us. This is well known to us intrinsically because when we are born with nothing. When we die, we don't take anything. So, not even this material body belongs unto us. So, but somehow or the other, because of our conception that we are this body, we are our attachment to this identity. I am Prakash. I am a father. I am an entrepreneur or technologist. I am a son. I am this and I am that. We become attached to these identities, and selfish desire arises from the heart. For example, when you are attached to the identity that you are a father, you expect your child in one way or the other to make you happy. There is nothing wrong. I mean, in fact, it is very natural to have a constitutional attachment to your daughter or your son. But it is not natural and it is selfish to have any kind of material attachment to our children. For example, parents expect that their children do well in their studies or in their life so that the parents can maintain some social stature and things. This is very common, very common. Even the best of parents in this world have these desires. So when we perform our duty of being a parent without attachment to the result. I love my child, and my child is part of the supreme whole, and I have been given the role in this life, the duty in this life to be a parent to this child, and hence I will perform my duty properly, when we do it from that platform, and when we say and when we realize, I don't expect anything in return from the child, and yet I will give all love and whatever a parent needs to give to the child. Mainly, the parent needs to give love to the child. Then that relationship becomes purified. Our heart becomes purified of the selfishness. And Arjuna then clarifies, so by working, but not for oneself. And Krishna says, yes, you now understand. If not for oneself, I should work for whom? Beautiful question, right? And Krishna goes on to describe in the seminal 10th verse of the fifth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, one who performs his duty without attachment, as we have seen before, attachment to the results. Surrendering the results unto the Supreme is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So Krishna is saying, in effect, work for me, work for God, work for the Supreme. You don't work for yourself. So this is Krishna slowly taking us from the I-centric model. So when the Bhagavad Gita began, Arjuna very much had the I-centric model. Me, my relatives, my family, my teacher. Hence I won't fight because I have compassion for these near and dear ones. He was basing his decision making on the fact that he is bodily related to these personalities and not on what is right and what is wrong or what is his duty. So all of us are at that stage when we begin to read the Bhagavad Gita, more or less. And Krishna, by first talking about identity and then talking about duty and then talking about transcendental knowledge, and finally in this chapter talking about peace, he slowly is dragging us from that I-centric model to the you-centric model. The you-centric model puts others in the center, and we can only put truly others in the center if we put God in the center, if we put Krishna in the center, because he is the source of all sources. He is the source of everyone and everything in this world, and he is the proprietor of everything. When we put him in the center, we naturally put everyone else in the center. And we are no longer in the I-centric model. That selfishness is gone. And the key to this is understanding and performing our duty without attachment to result. So the lotus and its leaf, though in the mud, this is the example that Krishna gives in that 10th verse, stay unaffected by the mud. Similarly, even if there are only evils around, one should learn to remain and stay unaffected by them. This takes practice. Of course, it takes practice. It's easier said than done. And only when we are in difficult situations we realize how difficult it is, how not easy it is to remain detached from your surroundings. But the fundamental principle remains, and by practice, by abhyasa, as we will see in the 6th chapter, Krishna will elaborate on how we can attain this state by abhyasa, practice, and vairagya, which is detachment. One can attain this state. Um, by practice, one can get to a point where uh, we don't attempt to change our circumstance if the circumstance is bad or good, but rather we attempt to change ourselves. We go within to change ourselves. So I'll pause. This is roughly the halfway point, and open the session up to some questions and discussion. Thank you, Suresh, for the note. Daniel or Keshav Madhav Prabhu, any questions or discussion?
I don't have any question just yet.
All right.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, unfortunately today I had to work and I just got off work and I just because I know it's transcendental vibration. And I was just playing you in the background, just kind of like to purify my environment while I was working. But I wasn't really able to like listen or pay any attention. It's just, but thank you so much for the dedication. It's just, I apologize that I wasn't able to focus. It's just, today
No,
was a day I had to work till 7:30, unfortunately.
no worries, no worries. No, thank you for joining us. I'll continue then. Arjuna then further clarifies. So, performing work, so attachment and not action causes bondage. This is very, very important because so far Arjuna has thought action leads to reaction, inaction leads to no reaction. Previously, in the third chapter, also, Krishna uh, told Arjuna, don't think inaction doesn't lead to reaction because many persons might not act outwardly, but in their mind they are contemplating all these different things, and that leads to reaction. Here, Arjuna has finally understood, and he is describing that attachment, not action, causes bondage. So, when we perform activity without attachment, there is no bondage, there is mukti. But if you perform activity with attachment to the results of the activity, then there is bondage. And then Arjuna hence wants to know how to become detached. Wonderful question. By the knowledge that you are not the only doer, very important. This is further expanded in the last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. See, there is doership, ownership, and enjoyment. Doership means I did something out of my own power, out of my own will, and out of my own strength. I did something. Ownership means the result is mine, and enjoyership means I should enjoy it. So these are very, very connected. But in reality, we are not the only doer. We are not this body, we are not this mind. As we will see in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says the first step to controlling your mind is to understand you are separate from your mind. There is you, the Atma, the soul, and then there is your mind. They are separate. So, uh, us, this pure spiritual infinitesimal particle of energy, the soul, we only desire. We can't do anything by ourselves. The super soul, Krishna present in our heart as the local divinity, he upadrishta anumanta, he oversees and he sanctions everything. Nothing happens without the sanction of the Supreme Lord. And finally, material nature or prakriti or the modes of material nature. We saw previously there are 3 modes of material nature: sattva, rajas, tamas, goodness, passion, and ignorance. The modes of material nature arrange. For example, I have a desire to make this presentation to you, but I need so many resources from material nature, including this body, to make this presentation. The desire might come from the level of the soul if it's a pure desire, but still I need this laptop, I need internet, I need Zoom, I need the wherewithal to put together the presentation, and I need the sanction of the Lord. So we are not the doer of activity, we are not the only doer of activity, we are only the desirer of activity. There is this beautiful analogy given in Katha Upanishad where the human body is compared to a chariot. This chariot is drawn by 5 horses, which are compared to the 5 primary knowledge acquiring senses: hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, and so on. And these 5 horses are connected to the reins, which are held by the driver. The reins are compared to the mind because the senses, the way the nature of the senses in our body is, they congregate around the mind. The mind is the rein which controls the senses. And the driver is compared to our intellect, the discriminating capacity. Should I go left or should I go right? And we you can imagine who we are. We are the passenger. So we are only observed. We have this desire, oh driver, go to such and such place, we will say. And the driver hopefully has the ability to control the mind and the horses. The intellect has the ability to control the mind and the horses to get to that place. If the intellect is not strong enough, it doesn't have transcendental knowledge, for example, then the horses will go all over the place because they'll be either controlling the mind or mind will control them. And the mind is chanchala. It goes up and down, up and down. So we are just the observer, we are just the desirer of activity. There are two other doers, the Supreme Lord as the sanctioner and material nature as the arranger of activities. Great example, Muhammad Ali, one of my inspirations in life. I read his autobiography while I was still at MIT. Very inspiring personality, of course, very famous. He said when he was fighting, I am the greatest, and I said that even before I knew I was. Later on in life, he had Parkinson's, unfortunately, and his speech was slurring. He had brain damage. The Los Angeles Olympics, I believe, he was asked to light the flame, and the Olympic torch he couldn't lift properly. He needed other people's support to light the flame, and he was invited to opening ceremonies where you cut the ribbon, and later on in life he had difficulty even using the scissors. And some journalist asked him at the time, "Do you still think you're the greatest?" And Muhammad Ali said, "I am the greatest fool." This is a quote from him. You can look it up in YouTube. There's a recorded video of this. And he went on to say, I thought I was becoming a champion. I was becoming all these things by my own strength. But now I realize that it is not so. I am not. In effect, he said, I am not the doer of activities. Very, very wonderful personality. Lot to learn from him. So only in ignorance does a person begin to believe that whatever good has happened has so happened because of him or her, and that is why he or she alone has the complete right over whatever result that has been achieved. So, doership, ownership, enjoyment, all connected. But Arjuna wants to clarify. But don't we seek? I mean, there's nothing wrong in enjoying, right? Don't we seek enjoyment naturally? Obviously, the soul constitutionally, one of the three features of the soul, we discussed this in the second chapter also, is it is eternal, as Krishna established. It's full of knowledge and it's full of bliss. So the constitutional position of the soul is for it to be in a state of bliss or joy. So there's nothing wrong in enjoying or searching for happiness. What is wrong is for looking for it in wrong places. We should listen to Krishna, one who created this universe, and he can tell us how and where to find real happiness. And Krishna tells us in the 17th verse of this wonderful chapter, look for enjoyment within. Tolerate the external temptations. The external enjoyment is temporary. Happiness is an inside job, Krishna says. Redirect the pleasure-seeking propensity from outward to inward, from matter to spirit. Very, very important advice. Arjuna clarifies, we might also be having the same question. What do you mean look within? And Krishna says, focus on the supreme within. I am present inside you as local divinity, as Paramatma, as super soul. Focus on that within you. And again, wonderful question by Arjuna. So if I focus within, how do I deal with this external world? Because you're telling me I should do my duty, I should fight, but at the same time you're telling me focus within for your enjoyment, go within yourself for your enjoyment. So how will I deal with the outside world then if I'm focused within? How will I do my duty? And Krishna speaks one of the seminal verses of the Bhagavad Gita, certainly one of my top 5 favorite verses from the Bhagavad Gita. Let me recite the Sanskrit please excuse me. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Pramine Gavihastini Suni Chaiva Swapakecha Pandita Samadarshinaha. So Pandita, a truly learned person, how he deals with the outside world. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, armed by Vidya, armed by education or knowledge, he is able to see a Brahmana, a Gavi, a Hastini, a Suni, and a Swapake as equal. A Brahmana is a learned person. He is able to see a learned person. Gavi is a cow. Hastini is an elephant. Suni is a dog. And Swapake is an illiterate person. He is able to see a learned person, an illiterate person, and these animals as equal, Samadarshana, true equity. As I said in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, in the name of equity and equality, what is being shoved down our throat is nothing more than providing people at uh, a seat at the table of exploitation. So today, certain races are less well off and discriminated against. So let's provide them a seat at the table of exploitation. So let's provide women, let's provide black people a seat at the table of exploitation, so that we can continue this model of exploitation. That is not equality. That is not equity. This is being shoved down our throat as such, but it is not. Real equity means armed with knowledge, we are able to see everyone as equal at the level of spirit. At the level of the body, we are obviously not equal. You and I have different bodies. I have different strengths. You have different strengths. I have different weaknesses of the body. You have different weaknesses of the body. You and I are different at the level of the mind, but we are equal at the level of the spirit. All of us are infinitesimal. All of us, in our constitutional position, we are eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. And that is a person who goes within to find his enjoyment and happiness. He deals with the outside world in this way. He sees everyone as equal. In fact, in the seventh chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna further says he even sees material objects as equal. He sees a pebble or a stone or a precious gem, gold or whatever, as equal. He doesn't discriminate. For him, those are temporary and hence they are equal. So equal vision means all of us, all living entities, not just human beings, all living entities are souls, eternal sparks of consciousness, infinitesimal sparks of consciousness. And in all of us is the super soul. In every heart of every living entity in this world and the next, Krishna is present as the super soul. This is a meditation. It's really wonderful, makes a huge difference to your life if you can meditate on this on a daily basis and try to see everyone as that fundamental spark of consciousness and nothing more and nothing less. Arjuna, again speaking on our behalf, this question might again arise, but external pressures seem so attractive. We are saying go within, but external pressures are still so attractive. And Krishna further explains that such pleasures are ephemeral, and while they may begin as nectar, they end as poison. They put you in great distress. While the day before the exam, you might really enjoy that sporting event. Um, when you take the exam and when your results come, it will end in distress for you. But Arjuna further questions, but people get used to these external pressures. And Krishna categorically points out, the wise do not delight in them. Even for one who knows the urge to enjoy is always there. Very, very true, very wonderful point by Arjuna. Learn to tolerate that urge and do not act on it. This is fundamental to spiritual life, ladies and gentlemen, is we have to tolerate our urges. Because of having this body, because of having material desire, we have a lot of, if we cannot control our senses, then lust enters our senses, it enters our mind, it enters the intellect. Then the horses are driving the chariot rather than the passenger directing the driver and the intellect driving the chariot. So it's very, very important. In any yoga, any path of yoga, one has to control one's urges to sense gratify. And Arjuna wants to know, till when should I control my senses? Lifelong. And Arjuna says, how is that possible? And Krishna says, it's possible for one who delights inward, a person who goes within. And he describes this person now as a perfect yogi. Here, Arjuna gets a little confused by the word yoga. Then he questions, I am a worker, I am a Kshatriya, I am not a yogi. So how is it possible for me? And Krishna clarifies that I didn't mean Ashtanga yoga or a sannyasi by yoga, one who has given up the way of life, but they too can attain liberation. That path is difficult. So the path of Ashtanga yoga is described in the 6th chapter, which we will see in the next session. We'll have Yamuna Prabhu present the 6th chapter on Ashtanga yoga or Dhyana yoga. And finally, Krishna ends this wonderful chapter with an amazing verse, secret to peace in life. This is the peace formula. Srila Prabhupada, the author of Bhagavad Gita as it is, calls this the peace formula. So listen carefully, ladies and gentlemen. There are only 3 things we need to know to be peaceful in life. Bhoktaram yagne tapasam, sarvaloka maheshwaram, suhridam sarvabhutanam, nyatva shantir. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam means we are not the enjoyer of activities. He, the Supreme, is the enjoyer of activities. Sarvaloka Maheshwaram means we are not the proprietor of anything. He, the Supreme, is the proprietor of everything, including our body, including the life air in our body belongs unto him. Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam, he is the, even though he is the supreme enjoyer and he is the supreme proprietor, it's not as if he is some aloof entity who is the enjoyer and the proprietor of everything and not connected with us. He is the best friend of all of us. If we understand these 3 things, we will be peaceful in life. Doesn't it make sense? Even if you do not believe in the Bhagavad Gita, if I tell you that if you give up the attitude of being the enjoyer, if you constantly just want to enjoy and accumulate ways of enjoyment in your life, it is a baggage, it is a load that you are carrying in your back wherever you move, wherever you go. If you start imbibing and understanding you are not the supreme enjoyer, you are the servitor who serves others, the you-centric model instead of the I-centric model, that baggage is immediately lifted. Second, if you understand that you are not the proprietor of everything, you don't have to worry about owning this and owning that and how do I protect this and how do I protect that. We do our duty. If we need a house to live properly and perform our duty, we get a house, but we don't get attached to the idea that we are the owner of the house. When that is realized by us, another level of baggage is lifted. We become more free. And finally, when we realize there is a Supreme who is the best friend of me, that is so liberating. We feel protected, we feel loved. So once we realize these 3 things, Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam, we become perfectly peaceful. The peace formula. In this regard, I would like to give this real life wonderful example. So on one United flight in the US, there was a girl who was traveling by herself. Maybe she was 9, 10 years old, and She was sitting next to this business person who was wearing a suit, very business-like, very gentlemanly, if you will. And suddenly, this flight hit turbulence. Tremendous. This was a long flight, 4.5 hour flight to Denver from somewhere on the East Coast, and it hit turbulence. And the turbulence was so severe. The flight was dropping altitude suddenly, and then it was regaining, and it was shaking, and the oxygen mask came out, and all that. And this business person was extremely worried. He started getting worried what will happen. He started getting tense. Everybody around him was starting to get tense. But he observed this girl. She was very, very calm. And the whole 4 hour flight was horrible. It was full of turbulence, as can be the case sometimes in domestic flights in the US with weather involved. And finally, it lands in Denver. And throughout the flight, only this girl is calm and collected. And she's just reading her book and quiet by herself. And in spite of all the shaking, all the turbulence, she's not, doesn't seem worried. So at the end of it, this man asks this little girl when they land safely, thankfully. He asked this girl, how did you remain so calm throughout the flight? And the girl says, I knew we would land safely. So the man says, how do you know you would land safely? And the girl says, because the pilot is my father, and I know him, he is my hero, and I know he will land the flight safely. So I felt very calm. So this is the peace formula, ladies and gentlemen, is when we know the pilot of our lives is Krishna, is God, and that he will land us safely in every turbulent situation. We become calm, we become happy, we become peaceful. This girl was the embodiment of peace in a very, very turbulent situation. And without doubt, this world is full of turbulence. All our lives will hit turbulence off and on, if not constantly. There is no way to be in this world where there is no externally stimulating turbulent situations or disturbing situations. But our goal is to go beyond that by understanding Bhoktaram Ekne Tapasam. We are not the enjoyer, he is the supreme enjoyer. Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, we are not the proprietor, he is the proprietor. So Hridam Sarva Bhutanam, he is the best friend of us. When we understand this, we can go beyond. So this chapter, quickly summarizing. So Krishna declares that Karma Yoga is as good as giving up and going to the forest. You don't have to do that. You have to perform your activity detached from the results. Being detached from the results is the key. And in order to be detached, we have to understand we are not just the doer. The Lord is the sanctioner of all activities, and material nature is the doer. It arranges everything according to our desire. We are only the passenger in this chariot of the human body. We are not the doer. We are just the desirer and observer of activities. In the final verses, Krishna beautifully describes how to go within to find happiness. Happiness is an inside job. And finally, he describes peace, the peace formula, the three things that make us peaceful when we realize them. Really wonderful chapter, one of my favorites. I hope all of you found that useful. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I don't have any questions, Prakash, but thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for your time.
Thank you, Daniel, for joining us. Thank you. Keshav
Hare
Prabhu?
Krishna. Hare Krishna. Yeah, I just wanted to a couple of points. You know, you mentioned really, really nice points. Actually, I really, really enjoyed them. The equal vision. You know, how we actually, you know, once someone is established on a spiritual platform, he actually sees that every single living entity is parts and parts of the Lord, and they just see the spirit. They don't necessarily see the material body, which has defects. Just like you said, it has strengths and it has weaknesses. but the spirit is individual and it's completely perfect, you know, in that kind of sense. We all have like this. It's like it almost feels like we're like a little bitty um, superheroes. Everybody's got like some kind of supernatural power that nobody else has, you know, which makes us kind of unique in that kind of sense.
Yes.
But it's also like the, you know, in today's society people talk about um, you know, liberal, you know, let's have equal rights, let's have equal, you know, gender equality, sexual equality, racist equality, which is all great ideas, you know, I'm all for it. But like, we see so many times that there's no really good examples of that. You know, there's always some kind of disturbance pretty much in any kind of, every time there's some kind of political agenda, we see some kind of political, confusion or disturbance or some form of aggression. Or to me, I mean, in my personal opinion, I feel like it pretty much in everybody who has like at least some idea of spiritual understanding, the ultimate liberal thinking is when you actually see everybody as a spirit soul. This is what equality means, you know. I mean, because what, how can it talk about equality, just like you said, because we all have different strengths, different weaknesses. If we don't see our if we don't see each other as this, as that spiritual spark that you just mentioned, we'll always focus on the weaknesses and the strengths we have on one another. We always separate and judge and make difference, and you know, it's practically impossible to achieve that, you know. I mean, this is my personal opinion, I could be wrong, but
No, no,
um
you're spot on. That's what I was mentioning also, right? The other kind of equality, the Black Lives Matter, all that stuff makes sense because people have been discriminated against, but you're just fighting for getting a seat at the table of exploitation, and
mhm.
hence, you know, what's the end goal, right? So, very, very good points, Prabhu. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more point that you mentioned towards the end, which is basically like the, you know, it's the most fundamental point in Krishna consciousness, but still, I mean, it takes a lot of purification to understand it, especially for myself. That ultimately we are not the enjoyers. It all boils down to that. You know, it's easy to say, but easy to understand because it does make sense if you have at least slight faith in God. It does make sense. But you know, it's just that desire to rule over the material nature is just so powerful. Like we're not even aware of it how we have it. So um but thankfully we have the association of great saints like you, so we can actually get a little glimpse of what is it to go beyond that, at least for a split of a second. So thank you, bro. Yeah.
Thank you, bro. Very, very important point. It's very difficult to realize. Not difficult. It's requires, like you rightly said, requires a lot of purification to realize we are not the enjoyer and he is. But it makes sense. Yeah. Wonderful points. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, folks. This has been a pleasure. Next week, a lot more people will be live on the Zoom because it's this week is Memorial Day weekend, and some of our regulars, 5 of them, I think, have gone to the Memorial Day retreat at Geeta Nagari. I just also want to, via this recording especially, want to remind people to sign up for the Body, Mind, Spirit retreat in Geeta Nagari at the towards the end of August. The links are out in the WhatsApp group, so I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
Jai. Hare Krishna.